Welcome to the channel. In this video, we are going to review the results from 6 different tests that I did comparing 3 different types of steel, O1, A2, and PMV11. Now I'm going to look at 3 main categories for them, and that is edge retention, sharpenability, and longevity. But in looking at all of these results, a 4th category came up, which I kind of consider a bonus category that we'll talk about as well. And my main goal is to answer the question, is PMV11 worth the extra price? Short answer is yes. Let's dive in. To briefly explain the 6 different tests that I conducted. So I tested them out on 3 different species of wood and in a few different ways. So the first one is I tested it on Ipe, planing with the grain. The second one was also on Ipe, against the grain. I did 3 tests on cherry, one of them with thin shavings on the edge, thick shavings on the edge, and then end grain. And the very last test I did is I cut a chamfer on the edge of a hickory board. I do want to note too that this video is just going to be the results. If you want to see the ins and outs of the testing and all of the raw data and all of that kind of stuff, feel free to check out my Patreon page where I take a deep dive into all of these numbers. Our first category is edge retention, and to check for this, I tested the cutting edges 3 different times before and after the different tests. And then I took all of those averages and put them together into this spreadsheet. And as you can see, PMV11 is the winner, O1 is the loser. It did the worst in all of these tests. But if you notice, PMV11 only won 2 of the categories. It didn't blow the other irons out of the water and just steal the show by winning them all. So I wanted to take this even a step further and compare all of those differences together to see throughout those 6 tests, what kind of points did they lose on average. And that's where you see this spreadsheet right here, and this is where you can see that PMV11 won because it only lost 29 points on average compared to O1 that lost 41 points. And then, of course, we're seeing that A2 is falling right in the middle. I'm sure if a lot of you guys know these different steel types, you kind of knew that these were going to be the results. Category number 2 is sharpenability, and to check for this, after tests 1 through 3, I took the blades to the strop. I did 5 swipes on the bevel, 3 swipes on the back to see how much of its edge that it regained. I am going to show you the spreadsheet here so you can start looking at the data, but I do want to explain that I'm not super happy with these results because it's not really consistent. And let me explain what I mean. So if you look at tests 1 and 2, O1 clearly won because it regained most of its edge. But if we compare that to the edge retention test, it lost most of its edge. Then let's look at number 3, or test number 3. A2 regained most of its edge, but at edge retention test number 3, it lost most of its edge. So of course, those ones are going to gain more points because they had lost most of their edge. So that's where I'm saying this is a little bit, it's something I didn't think about when I was doing the test. But I do want to note that for all 3 of the irons, it only took 5 swipes on the strop and they got back into fighting shape, which is something that I'm really excited about. In experience with PMV11, or in my experience with PMV11, I don't have an issue with sharpening it. I know some people have stated it takes forever to sharpen. I use the Shapton Karamakku ceramic water stones, and I have 0 issue sharpening this iron. When I did have diamond plates, I did run into a bit of an issue sharpening it, and it did feel like it took forever. But with these water stones, it's no issue at all. I've also gotten to try out those Sigma Power water stones that you can get from Heartwood Tools. And those stones are hands down the best sharpening stones I've ever used. I've used Shapton glass and I sold it because I didn't like it. Those, eventually I'm going to sell the Karamakkus. I'm going off on a tangent. Eventually I'm going to sell those Karamakkus and get the Sigma Power water stones because they're fantastic. Some were donated to Plain Wellness. I get to test them out when I'm preparing tools for the organization. And one day I'm going to own a personal set because they are fantastic and they also have no issue with PMV11 either. I want to add in another note here just to highlight it. I am only using the strop to get these irons back into fighting shape. They are not hitting the stones. I think a lot of people, when they think sharpening, they think, oh, I've got to go back to my jig and sharpen on the stone and do all of this kind of stuff. You don't. Keep a strop handy, take the iron out, swipe it on the strop, and it's back into fighting shape. And these 3 tests show that. It's also something that I do normally in my woodworking, especially if I'm using chisels. I always have my strop on the bench so I can chisel away. If I notice it's dull a little bit, hit it on the strop and it's good to go again. The only time you really need to hit your stones is if there's a chip out or if you're changing the angles of your irons or something like that. Sometimes I'll go to the strop, see that it didn't work well enough, and then I'll go to my stones to refresh that edge. But I get away with the strop for a long time, so just keep that in mind. So category number 3 is longevity, and the reason that I'm separating this out from edge retention is because I did something a little bit different. For edge retention, I tested, sharpened, so on and so forth. But for tests 4 through 6, I just tested, and I didn't sharpen. So what I checked for is the sharpness before test number 4 and the sharpness after test number 6 to see how it holds out through all of the tests and through normal use. If you guys follow my channel, you know that a lot of my tests are just in use and practical type applications. I don't do like the scientific method type testing because I just want to know when I'm using a tool, how is it going to react? And that's what I test for. So in this longevity test, as you can see, 01 did lose, PMV11 did win. There is a pretty drastic gap between 01 and PMV11. Again, we see that A2 is falling right in the middle. It's kind of fallen in the middle for all of these tests. So this is a very brief way to show you that the edge on the PMV11 iron is going to last longer, reducing the amount of time that you have to sharpen. And if we look back at the sharpen-ability test, you can see that it's really easy to get that edge back when it is time to sharpen. So for our bonus category, we are looking at the consistency of these irons. And this is something that I didn't plan for and I didn't expect, but in looking at these results, it's something that popped up. PMV11 is just more consistent than the other ones. Let's look at a few different categories within that. The first area is consistency along its cutting edge. So as I had mentioned, I tested the irons at 3 different points before and after the test. I took those 2 extreme points and compared them to each other to see across the edge, does it wear equally? Does it regain its edge equally? And for that, you can see that PMV11 is the best with it. It stays consistent along its edge, where 01 kind of tends to be all over the place. The next part has to do with sharpening, and what I wanted to compare is when I did refresh them on the strop, what was the highest amount of points that it regained from the strop versus the lowest amount of points that it regained from the strop. And you want those numbers to be closer together so you have a more consistent idea of what it takes to sharpen this iron. So looking at those numbers here, as you can see again, 01 is across the board, where PMV11, those numbers are close together, telling me that 5 swipes on the strop is all this needs, where 01, sometimes it could need more swipes, sometimes it could need less swipes, and you aren't really sure. But I wanted to dive into this a little bit more. So let's look at the sharpness after those 5 swipes on the strop. 01, as you can see, it's kind of all over the place. A2, kind of all over the place. But look what happened with PMV11. 5 swipes, and it got really, really close to the same sharpness number. 2 of the times it was dead on 145 points, and another time it was 148, and that's after 5 swipes. And the reason I'm saying this is important is because now I know for PMV11, if I just go to the strop and do a couple of these swipes to refresh it, it's the same every single time. Where again, with the other ones, sometimes you might need more swipes, sometimes you might need less swipes. We're not really sure because it's inconsistent. PMV11 is very consistent. I also did a little mini test for myself, which was checking to see if edge retention is affected by the thickness or the thinness of the shaving. I will say that I only did one thick and one thin and compared them. If you're going to make this a big test, it needs to be tested many, many more times to get a true or consistent answer. But I do want to point out that the 01, it did better with thin shavings. The A2 did better with thick shavings, but for PMV11, no difference. It was the same. It was consistent. And that is something that I think puts PMV11 way ahead of all of the other ones. All right, so as you can see, yes, PMV11 is worth the extra money. If you are debating between 01 and A2, I'm going to caution you and just say that it's not that much more money to get PMV11. It would be worth waiting and saving up a little bit more to get that iron, because these irons are most likely going to last your lifetime, especially if you consider that all you have to do is take that iron to the strop and it's back into fighting shape. You don't have to regrind it all of the time. So, just something to keep in mind. Alright, I hope you guys enjoyed. If you got any questions, any comments, anything like that, feel free to let us know down below. Don't forget to check out my Patreon if you want more information, and have a good day.